Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are following us. My name is Christian Chito. I'm the founder of Peacemaker 360. And today we're very happy to be joined together with Jorge and Cata. Jorge is calling us from Peru and Cata is calling us from Chile. And we'll have a very wonderful conversation. And all of this call is going to be marked within the framework of the International Youth Day. We'd like to hear from these amazing and talented young peace builders what they've been doing. But before we get into the conversation today, maybe a little bit of a background of what this day means to the world that we are part of as young peace builders. So there are currently 1.8 billion young people ages between 10 and 24 around the world. And this is the largest youth population that the world has ever known. However, more than half of all children and adolescents ages between 6 and 14 lack basic reading and math skills, despite the fact that the majority of them are actually attending school. So this global learning crisis threatens to severely hamper progress towards the SDGs. And today, on August 12th, this day was designated by the General Assembly of the UN in 1996 as a day to remind us of the potential that young people bring in terms of responding to some of the world's most threatening challenges. And within the framework of the SDG Sustainable Development Goals, this particular year, the 12th of August, we are celebrating education. We are looking at how education can be a tool to address some of the challenges that youth are facing. So again, without further ado, I'm going to get into the conversation, inviting our amazing guests today to join in and just say a few words, introduce yourself, and say hi to our viewers online.
Okay.
Maybe we can start with Jorge.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jorge. I'm from Peru.
Hi.
My organization is Brigada de Voluntarios Bolivarianos del Perú. It's a youth organization. The creation takes place at the 23 in 1982. We do social works and we help areas from Peru that are really dangerous and poor. So we have like more than 30 branches in all the country, and we are working together.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that introduction, Jorge. Maybe Catalina as well can introduce herself.
Thanks, Christian. First of all, thanks for inviting me and thank you for being here. This is really great for me, at least. And my name is Catalina Salazar. I studied political science and I'm part of an NGO that's called Social Hip Hop, which is in Chile and recently in Brazil. Basically what we do, we have 3 lines of action: neighborhood, school, and action itself. Okay, what that means, like, we work a lot in high school and educational system. We also work in neighborhood directly from in the street, and we've been starting an interesting work with youth in prison, youth prisoners. So we've been existing since like 5 years from now. Yeah, 5 years. And now we're developing a more specific project related to peace construction process and peace education that's called Hip Hop Cultura de Paz. Pretty much that I would have to say for now.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, thank you again very much for the warm introduction, and thank you already to our viewers who are connecting to this wonderful conversation that we'll have with Jorge and Catalina. And these are very amazing and talented young peace builders in the region, and they're also part of the United Network of Young Peace Builders. We'll get back to that. But before we get into the gist of the call, maybe a little bit again of a context of why this International Youth Day means so much to us as young peace builders. And maybe to bring us again into the conversation with the context that Catalina shared about the peace education work they're doing, working with youth who are coming from the prison system, also what Jorge is doing in Peru. I would like just to share a few things that I think are really important to kind of contextualize the conversation. So this year's theme highlights efforts to make education more inclusive and accessible for all youth, including efforts by youth themselves. And I want to maybe ask Catalina, from your work in Chile, could you maybe tell us about what you have done to make peace education more inclusive, and what methods and strategies you use to make sure that youth own the processes of educating the society?
Well, first of all, I have a regional view in which the society in South America has advanced a lot in terms of providing education for basically all youth, at least in basic time, like at least in mid school and high school. Most of regions, not all of them, of course. But then the second thing is how we can provide quality education and how we can make schools a safer place. UNICEF has tried to approach that, and in this defeat we try to make a context, and so all our projects are related to make schools and make not just schools but educational context safer and better places so people can learn how to practice a culture of peace. We say conflict, war is not something that it's a stick to your skin when you were born. If I could have this example. So those are practices you learn and then you reproduce basically in an educational system that could either support you to be a more peaceful person and become a more peaceful society, or all the opposite. So, and how do we bring hip hop into that? Hip hop was born in really conflict and violent environmental, such as the Bronx, and mostly marked by some police abuse, problems with segregation, marginalization. But then, along with the creativity and the practice of singing, dancing, and other hip hop features such as DJing, like, and painting, and etc. And they get to make a switch, and that's how it started in Chile. Also, during the 80s, it was the end of Pinochet's dictatorship. So there was this new wave of approaching the violence that we lived during those days. So it was a way to face creatively violence in society. So that's what we've keep doing, facing violence through art, basically, and that's how we contribute to creating this more peaceful society. And in concrete terms, I would say that we had this really great experience with hip hop education, which was our biggest project. It's the biggest project we've had. It was about replacing some subjects in school with hip hop methodology. So we use hip hop as a way to reach communities' capacities. You know, and that turned out really well. And now we just keep innovating, keep trying to do new things, always trying to bring peace to education and education to peace as a permanent process, I would say.
It's totally very powerful to hear you mention how you use hip hop as actually a tool to address some of the conflict that Chile had gone through. You've mentioned the hard days or the very bloody days of Pinochet, and how the country needed to explore new methodologies to approach the violence. And in this particular day, we're talking about peace education as a tool to prevent and to even transform conflicts. Now, my focus then is going to go to Jorge. If you can share a little bit about your work as well, to what extent have you embraced peace education, and how in your context does it work? What methods, what methodology, what approaches do you use to talk about peace education?
Okay, yes. Basically, my organization do a volunteer job. So, in Peru, we have Peru is very centralized country, so we have a lot of vulnerable zones or areas. So, what we do is do volunteer work, such as building houses, sports, but also we teach the people. We we are uh, we are focusing to in the education, and for example, we teach the people how to start their own business, and the projects will depend on the area of the country. So we have a lot of issues around the country. Yeah.
Mhm. It's quite interesting what you mentioned there, Jorge, that you work with youth and your approach basically has to do with volunteerism. And when you talk about volunteerism, it's building this culture of service among young people that they can feel called to give back to their community. And I think that has to do with peace education, even connecting what Catalina has been mentioning earlier there. There's no way you can move a society to transforming or preventing its own conflict if it is not coming from themselves. And this whole idea of it being bottom up rather than top down, I wonder how you've navigated that from your own context. Catalina, if you could say, even when you talk about hip hop, you've mentioned that it has come from, it's a culture that came from New York, right? It started in New York. And too often people look up to the US or the West as the ones that are setting the tone or giving the example. How do you navigate that tension? How do you make your process look more generic, more top down in terms of approaching peace education?
Do you mean how do I navigate this, like maybe contradiction between top down, bottom up, something like that?
Now, what I'm trying to say is often when we talk about peace education, when you talk about engaging with the world, we are caught up within structures that are top down. And when you give the example, for example, of social hip hop that you've been doing for a long time now, I have a sense that you work from the bottom up, that you engage people to think about creative and innovative ways to transcend their conflict, but from the bottom up. And how is that process for you? Just maybe trying to tell us, how do you navigate that, knowing, of course, that you've referred to hip hop, and hip hop is something not from Chile, it's from the US. But how do you transform something from abroad to
Okay.
be something you gain from
Yeah,
the bottom up? Yes.
I think that first of all, I would say that society is always changing. And the thing is, I would say that maybe some things are bottom up, are top down, whatever. Like
Yeah.
maybe sometimes we see things too vertically. But I would say that our society, especially now, is developed in many directions. So in that sense, hip hop has always been a culture that has the capacity, and I would say this is amazing, of um, of transforming things and appropriating things.
Mm.
Because now we have singers like hip hop singers, rappers who are doing an amazing job in terms of, for example, environmental conscious, creating that. There's a lot of indigenous rap bands. So culture itself is something that it's always changing.
Mm.
So even though it started from the USA, and I would have to say that it was also created in groups that were really marginalized with immigrants and other racial minorities. So it always have hip hop always has to be with some kind of underground culture that goes changing and changing. And since music has no fronteras, has
No boundaries, yeah.
no boundaries, I would say that's really great, you know? So, it, and then you have this north south um, hierarchy, maybe,
Yes, yes.
but I wouldn't say that is like a rule in culture again, because culture always reveals a mix of people, knowledges. I mean, salsa,
Mhm,
cumbia,
mhm,
samba, hip hop, jazz.
mhm.
So I would say it's more like it's all mixed, I would say.
There's one thing that I would like to pick from what you shared, Catalina, which is that culture is always evolving and times are always changing, that we are picking the
Yeah.
best from our cultures and from different times to be able to innovate. And one thing that I think also you've mentioned is true is that there are always new traditions from cultures like indigenous communities that often have not been given so much attention. But when you start understanding that transformation is all inclusive, then you would want to hear what do the indigenous people think or say about peace education, and how can we tap into their culture? What are their values in terms of addressing peace education? And that is very important even now as we're talking about promoting inclusivity in peace education. This is the International Youth Day. But I want to maybe bring a little bit again of a context before I give the floor to Jorge here. This is one thing that I think is also important to keep in mind, is that inclusive and accessible education is crucial to achieving sustainable development and can play a role both in the prevention and the transformation of conflict. And education, as we know it, is a development multiplier, which means it plays a pivotal role in accelerating progress of all sustainable development goals. Now, let me go back to you, Jorge. If you could say something to that point about education being a multiplier of sustainable development goals, meaning that education is the vehicle that can help all the other sustainable development goals to be achieved. Can you
Yeah,
maybe say from your context, how do you think education is making a big impact through your work? How do you think education is actually changing the way you're relating with your communities in
yeah.
Peru?
So yes, we focus on vulnerable areas. So people there have no internet, have no water, have no electricity. So what we offer to young people is education and identity with themselves.
Hmm.
So why identity? Because in my country there are a lot of discrimination with this kind of areas, poor areas.
Yeah.
So when so I think they have to be strong, to face this kind of, to face Lima in to face the
Mhm.
capital. The people here is really really. Uh, I don't want to say there are bad people, but there are a lot of discrimination in my country. I think this. So what we offer to young people is identity and education. Yes.
I think that's very important. One of the key areas that you've mentioned about the power of education is that it bridges the gap between marginalized communities and communities that often have the control over resources and power. And in the context of Peru, you're sharing that there is a big disconnect between communities that are marginalized and people who are in the capital and making decisions. And I think this is actually probably a trend, not just in Peru, but also in most countries, even in Latin America, where we see a big disconnect between those who are living in the rural areas and those who are living in the urban areas, those who are, let's say, have access to information and those who do not have access, those who have access to voice, but those who do not have access. And in the context of Chile, of course, this is also probably also as an issue that you address. But I would like to hear from you, Catalina, if you could share a few thoughts about how do you think education can be a vehicle to achieve sustainable development goals, because we have 17 sustainable development goals, and all of these are part of the Agenda 2030. Very recently, we've been talking about it in our regional forum here. And some of the issues that we talk about, the 17 goals, If I may just mention a couple of them to keep us in the context, we have education, we have eradication of poverty, we have access to opportunities, we have issues to do with climate change. So there's so many issues that Agenda 2030 is trying to address, but I'm curious to hear from your thinking. Catalina, how do you think education can be a powerful vehicle to achieve those goals?
I would say education is the most important tool and vehicle to achieve those goals, because even if we could make several changes in terms of policy, or even our governments, or even the system itself, if we want to talk about this bigger huge things, if that doesn't relate to education changes and cultural changes, that I would say, thinking that the education now is going to be the culture of tomorrow, basically,
Mhm.
it's pointless, because the changes are not gonna last. One of the things that amazes me the most about this gender equity agenda is that, first of all, it has been a change in the way we see each other, and that it's a more permanent change than, for example, just changing a president, for example. You
Yeah.
know, so I would say it's the best vehicle and the most important vehicle to achieve that. But most of, but even, I mean, besides that, education is the biggest richness that societies could have. I mean, I know that there are some basic needs that people need to have covered, such as food, a place to live, some dignity, But then what falls from it, it's education, because that's what makes people feel free and live in a good place. And also, education provides integration and makes us look wider than we used to look. I would say it's really, really important.
I agree with you fully, Catalina, on what you say. Education is definitely a powerful vehicle to achieve sustainable development goals. And it also helps people to start thinking creatively as well about issues that are affecting their communities. And one key area I think that's also important to highlight here is not that just we are talking about formal education, which can be perceived as just the first path, but there are also informal education, and in which case often we don't talk about other alternative ways of being informed, being educated, that can help us, even though we don't have a degree, even though we don't have a master's or a PhD, but we are very much informed about the issues that are affecting our communities. And I think the work that you're doing with NGO Social Hip Hop is basically tapping on that informal education and saying, hey, you don't need to go in school. Here is a tool that you can actually use to have a voice. Here is a tool that you actually have to pass a message, to share information, to educate the masses about what really matters to our community. Now, I want to move from this conversation into the work that we are all doing as part of the UNOI network. Just for those who are not familiar about UNOI, so the United Network of Young Peace Builders is a network that gathers around 100 organizations from different parts of the world. And it's a network that is based out of The Hague, and that helps youth-led initiatives to be more impactful, that supports them in their capacity building, supports them in increasing their visibility. And just recently, the UNOI network had its first regional forum in the Americas, to which Jorge and Catalina participated, and that's how I also got the chance to get to meet them. But I want to get to ask them how, maybe to start this conversation about UNOI, how did you get involved with UNOI? What brought you as part of the network? And secondly, Jorge, this is directed to you. How do you think the network is helping your work in Peru in one or the other?
So me first?
Yes, you may go first, sure.
Okay. So how the can you repeat the second question, please?
So the second question is, how is the UNOI network helping advance your work somehow in Peru? If you could maybe share some light to
Yes.
what you think is the relevance of
Yeah.
the network.
I think the most important is the UNOI give to us is the like the peace education, because we are always working in volunteering stuffs like building and I don't know, building houses and schools and something and stuff like that. But we are now we have now peace tools, let's
Mhm.
say. So I think this is the most important thing the UNOI give to us.
Mhm. And maybe you could say a little bit about the regional forum here. What was your appreciation? What was
Oh
your
yeah.
main takeaway? If you could share
Yeah,
some
sure, sure. I want to say
light.
Bogota is amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing place, and the forum was really, really hard and no difficult, but really like mm, conciso. How to say?
Very concise.
Concise. So yes, I learned a lot of from the forum and from the people from there. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, I think one of the key points that Jorge you've mentioned here about the way UNOI is supporting your work is by providing tools
Hmm.
that you can also replicate in your own context or adjust to your context. And I think this is very important to highlight, is that as part of the approach of UNOI network, what we do is to strengthen the capacities of individual organizations through online trainings and other resources that you've mentioned. And what we also seek to do is to amplify the voices of and experiences of young people in different contexts. And thirdly, what we do is we provide those spaces like the regional network, regional forum, that allow young people to share their stories, to share their work, and to connect with each other. Now I'm going to go back to Catalina. If you could share a little bit about how you think UNOI network is helping or supporting your work in Chile. How did you come to get to be part of the network, and what do you think is the relevance of such a network as part of your work?
Mm. Our experience was great because I personally didn't know about why until you guys contact us, and then we started noticing that we had so much in common in terms of our goals or work together, and it's really great to find out. I would say that's really powerful thing to know that some people that there's a lot of people doing the same thing, not same thing, I would say, but pursuing the same goal as you and trying to change the world towards the way you're trying to. So then we started to get in touch, and then I had the opportunity to know the rest of members in America. And I would say that first thing that and that's really great is connecting people and organizations, youth-led organizations, and so that's a great tool, because if we start to look at our problems as like the word problems, we're gonna find out that we have so much in common, more than difference, and
Mhm.
that's really great. And the other thing is that it gives visibility to the youth issue that most of, at least in Chile, youth itself is like maybe it's not a priority at all.
Mhm.
So when you have this world organization that has like 150 members in 50 countries,
Mhm.
that's really powerful, because it's not
Yeah,
something that you just want to, that you think it's important, like me, Catalina, but it's something that it's important to do development goals of several organizations. It's important to other organizations, and it's got to be more and more important to governments and to other public actors, I would say.
absolutely. Catalina, one of the key areas I think that you've highlighted there about the amazing work of UNOI is that it enables these connections among youth-led initiatives. It creates the spaces and platform for which these connections are possible. And also one thing that you've highlighted is that it bridges the gap between youth and stakeholders, probably in each context these have to do with policymakers and government leaders in our context. And I think that's really very important in terms of advancing the work. I don't know if Jorge has anything else to share about UNOI, but if there is not, I'd like to maybe get to our viewers. Thank you for those who are joining us online. If you have any questions related to the work that Jorge is doing in Peru, or the work that Catalina is doing in Chile, please, you may as well comment to the channel, and please get involved in the conversation. We are talking about the relevance of the International Youth Day in terms of the work that these amazing, talented young peace builders are doing in their own context. Just to bring you up to date, for those who are joining us right now, we are talking to Jorge, who is a member of Brigada in Peru. And this organization has been involved in promoting volunteerism and engaging young people in Peru to address social issues and bridging the gap between marginalized communities and other communities in Peru. We also have Catalina, who is representing NGO Social Hip Hop in Chile, whose main vehicle of transformation has been the power of hip hop and music to address social challenges, to address community problems, and to bring people together. So those are very interesting contexts. Catalina earlier mentioned that in Chile, Chile had gone through years of dictatorship under Pinochet, and recovering from those history, from that legacy of trauma and pain, is still a work that needs to be done, and that part of the organization, her organization is doing. And our friend Jorge has also talked about how in Peru, the marginalization of especially communities that are indigenous is still very prevalent, and how important it is on a day like this when you're talking about peace education. It's very important to look at some of the riches, some of the cultural traditions, some of the cultural practices that enrich our work in peace education. That is just to keep you updated. But here, maybe our first question comes from Bukavu Youth Action Center, which is an organization based out of the Congo. And here is a question they're asking to Catalina. From your context in Chile, can you tell us a little bit more how the dictatorship of Pinochet is still something that youth struggle with today? Like, how are youth struggling with the legacy of the dictatorship today?
First of all, I have to say that the generations that are before me are really way more marked by dictatorship than us. But it doesn't mean that we don't care. Actually, most of youth, I would say, in Chile, it's really against Pinochet. But it used to happen that, and it wasn't like that. Let's remember that Pinochet lost for a really wide, no, not wide, estrecho, with
straight or narrow,
straight margin. Like he almost,
yeah,
he almost didn't lose. So in that period, like he had a lot of supporters. But now, after a while, after all this truth and justice process, after all the trials to militaries, and after a lot of things that happen, youth is really more conscious about the Pinochet figure, and we don't fight about that as much. But it's a really huge issue for us, and I would say that it's a really big responsibility for us as a youth, as young people, as a youth, to preserve memory and prevent that from happening again. And how do we do it? If basically exercising the memory. And there's a lot of an expression that's always said in my country, that's para que nunca más, so never more, para que nunca más, in order to never more, nunca más. So we do everything para que nunca más, so it never happens again. There's a lot of memorial places, there's a lot of human rights projects, and there's a lot of culture about that. And I would say that it's an open wound, but it's been healing. It's been healing most of all in our generation. Maybe not so much in the older people, because of course they lost their their relatives, and they went through a lot. But the biggest issue for us is to maintain the memory always.
I agree totally with you on the point you've mentioned about nunca más, which is basically not to be repeated again. And I
Yeah.
think part of the legacy, as you've pointed out, is not necessarily affecting young people today, but probably the earlier generation. But you still understand that it's important to carry into other generations the memory of the past, so that we know the country knows which path not to walk to. And I just want to connect this part of memory with the conversation we've been having earlier about peace education. And I think part of peace education has to do with reminding people of their own history, or reminding people the trajectory that they have gone through, so that they know what happened in the past and what needs to be happening now, so that we don't go back into the same mistakes of the past. And maybe to go to Jorge, in your own context, maybe you could share a little bit. Could you share a little bit, because you mentioned about how indigenous community have been marginalized in the context of Peru for a long time, just in terms of memory and recognizing that history. Could you give us a little bit of a context in Peru? What's being done? What has been done to kind of keep that memory alive?
Mm, in my own, how to say, I really don't share this opinion of these people who discriminate the people who from the mountains specifically, because they have a lot of culture, you know.
Mm,
So I really don't know how these people can say that these guys have no are not smart, or because they have different skills, you know. It's really I don't know. uh, so there are no history, a background history. There is no a background history on this, but the people just don't like these guys from these poor areas because they don't have enough resources, and that's all. it's
mhm,
it's just about education, I think, because
mhm,
and this is a problem because um, the young the men who live in this marginal area needs the same education as a person who live in the capital, and probably these men have to get his family out of the poverty
mhm.
and face and then face the problems that the country has. And I think that's why the education is very important. And I think we in the capital we need more education than the people at the mountains, no.
Mm.
Mhm. It's quite interesting what you mentioned there, Jorge, about education being very crucial and important, and emphasizing that it's actually people in the cities, people in the capital who needs more education. And again, connecting to what Catalina has been mentioning here, this idea of moving masses to appreciating the legacy, to appreciating the memory. And I think this is sometimes the memory of the marginalized is not necessarily given space, or is not necessarily accepted within urban settings, within power settings. And I think this is part of the work that as young peace builders we need to do, to try to create spaces and avenues where these narratives that are often suppressed can actually be legitimized, can actually be given the space to be heard. And I think part of the creative process that Catalina has mentioned is the work, the role of hip hop in music in doing so. Now we're almost coming to the close of this wonderful conversation. I know we would love to continue this. Many people are engaging already online and asking questions, but I want to close this space of engagement with another very simple and reflective question, as to start with you, Catalina. When you think about the work that you're doing in Chile today, can you maybe share two or three big goals that you're trying to achieve, maybe in 1 year? I don't know. What are the main activities or projects that you would like people to be aware of in terms of the work that you're doing in Chile? And secondly, if you have any message that you would like to give to our viewers, young people from all over the world who are working on different initiatives and who today are joining in the conversation about the power of peace education in advancing sustainable development goals, what is the message that you can give to them? So just to wrap up the conversation again, one thing is key projects that Social Hip Hop is working on, and a message to encourage those who are also working in different contexts to advance peace education.
In our organization, we really want to be with the communities. I mean, we want to grow. We want to be bigger and bigger and be like reaching everywhere. But we want to go everywhere with a link with the communities. That's why we've been working with environmental conflict. We've been working in education. We've been working in jails because we want to be there for those who really need a voice and those who have been struggling. And I also would say that, but this is really this it's something really specific from the hip hop culture, that some people still sees the hip hop culture as something like gangster like, or something like really unprofessional, and maybe it's something that even could like go against youth. So that has always been our basic goal, that remove that
The barrier, right?
yeah, this dark image about us. And that's why we have this really big efforts trying to design good projects, trying to provide a professional work, that we try to systematize everything we do. We create videos. We are always trying to improve our of work quality, because it's the only way we have to make people believe and to show people that, okay, we are this, we're not that. So those two areas. And if I could have a message like, the most precious thing about youth is the belief and the strong belief that you can change everything. So I want to invite people to change everything, because we don't have more time. We have no time. So let's give it a shot.
Wonderful. Wow, what a powerful message, actually, again, to remind us young people working on different contexts, in different contexts, that the time is now. We can actually push ourselves to changing everything. And one thing I like about what you shared is the work of demystifying the misconception around hip hop as being something of the vulgar, of the of something that is outside of the periphery of the society that people should not follow. But I think again, it's important to change those mindsets and to actually attract more attention on the positive of hip hop. Again, I want to draw this moment to my friend Jorge. If you also want to share a few things that maybe you want our viewers to remember about the work you're doing in Peru, if you could just highlight one or two activities that are currently being taken, and maybe a message that is general to all of our viewers who are joining us today.
Yes, we are still working with young people. Personally, I'm working in a project who is Second Chance. We work with ex offenders, young people, so to delete this stigma from the society. And yes, we have talking about the next years. We want to reach more people at the national level, but I think we need more help, because at the national level we are fine, but we need more help from the other countries. We want to do great projects between Latin American countries or European countries to make a real change. That's important.
Wonderful. One of the key areas that you've highlighted, Jorge, is that you're working with youth trying to give them a second chance, those who have been ex-offenders. And I think it's very important to highlight that something that people can connect with. At the end of the live stream, I will share the links of their websites and the organizations you're involved with, so that people who are following us can continue engaging with the work and the content that you are producing. Again, we'd like to give a huge thanks to both of you, Jorge and Catalina, for making time today share with our audience. Thank you so much to those who are following us online, and continue engaging with the content. If you have any questions, please remain connected. We'd be glad to answer those questions as we move by. My name is Christian Chito, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you too. And thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks
All
for
right.
everything.
Thank you, Kata.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.